Welcome back to our continuing election 2013 coverage here on Viewpoint. I'm Chris Kenny. Now, Anthony Albanese was the right-hand man for Kevin Rudd when he was Prime Minister first time around. Then he was the right-hand man in Parliament for Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Now he's back being the right-hand man to Kevin Rudd. He's always been honest about his loyalties throughout all of this, a critical player in the Labor Party and in the government, especially now that he's been promoted to the Deputy Prime Ministership. I interviewed him from Canberra just a few minutes ago. Anthony Albanese, thanks for joining us now.
Good to be with you, Chris.
I haven't caught up with you since you became Deputy Prime Minister, so congratulations on that. And also...
Thank you very much.
Also, congratulations on going back to Kevin Rudd. Of course, the government was headed for probably an historic defeat. It was looking terribly bleak. But by going back to Kevin Rudd, you've certainly given the country a contest in the upcoming election.
Well, we certainly do have a contest. We start off behind, the polls indicate, but it's certainly close. And we believe that in Kevin Rudd we have a Prime Minister who has plans for the future. What has struck me is that Tony Abbott has seemed almost like he didn't know an election was coming. He had 3 years to prepare. He has been demanding an election each and every day for 3 years. But he doesn't have any plan or vision for the country, and you can't get through an election campaign by just saying no.
It's a bit rich, though, for Labor and Kevin Rudd to be talking about a new way, though, isn't it, given that he was the Prime Minister that his own party knifed back in 2010 because the government has lost its way?
Well, have a look at what we've put in place in a very short period of time, Chris. Engaging in party reform, the new solutions to the issue of dealing with asylum seekers and taking away the people smugglers' business. If you have a look at the way in which we've engaged in the policy debate right across the spectrum, even last Friday's economic statement, which was about being honest with the Australian people about the challenges that we confront.
I want to come to that economic debate in a moment.
Taking the Australian people into our confidence was, I think, a very important thing. It's not a new leader, is it? We don't have a new leader. It's the same old Kevin Rudd. This is the man that the Labor caucus got rid of in 2010. Well, this, in terms of Kevin Rudd, people will make their own judgments over the next 5 weeks or a little bit less. People in the caucus made their judgment when they determined that he was the right person to lead Labor into the election and beyond. Since then, if you have a look at the reforms that we've put in place, dealing with the carbon price issue by bringing forward the emissions trading scheme, something that Kevin Rudd has always stood for, and the Liberal Party under John Howard used to stand for as well, as the other changes that we've made.
Now, you've always been, in my view, upfront, honest and honourable in these leadership shenanigans that have gone on. But, of course, many of your colleagues have publicly condemned Kevin Rudd for undermining during the last election campaign, for leaking against Julia Gillard. Do you fear that some of the Julia Gillard loyalists will now seek to undermine Kevin Rudd's election campaign?
Look, we are a united party. I received a message from Julia when the election was called earlier on today, wishing us good luck to the team. I've spoke to Julia during the week. She certainly is very supportive, as is every single member of the Australian Labor Party, determined to ensure that we can be in a position to continue to roll out the National Broadband Network, continue with skills reform, the National Disability Scheme, continuing with nation-building infrastructure, continuing to look after hospitals and healthcare, and continuing to make sure that Tony Abbott isn't in a position to wreck all of those measures that have been put in place since 2007 and stop Australia going forward with a plan for the future. We're determined to do that. Each and every member of the Labor Party has been re-energised, including by giving the Labor Party membership a vote in who future leaders will be, has really re-energised the party. There's a a great deal of enthusiasm out there for the campaign. We had Kevin 07, you could feel it in 2007. Now we have a different Kevin 07, of course, of the September 7 date.
Now you've got
but there is that enthusiasm out there once again.
No doubt he's given your supporters something to campaign for. Yes, he's Kevin September 7 now. But let's go through some of those key policy challenges for the campaign that you mentioned. I'll start off with those Labor Party reforms. They're just promises from Kevin Rudd, aren't they? Because until the ALP National Conference does something about reforming the party and endorses what he's put to caucus, and in fact until the ALP Conference diminishes or reduces the power of the unions over the party, then the battle against faceless men and factional heavyweights has hardly even begun.
Not at all, Chris. What we've done is change the Labor Party caucus rules. That's why we had to give 2 weeks' notice to formally change it. It's done. Done and dusted.
Can't be undone by a national conference?
No, caucus is the master of its own destiny, and caucus has changed its rules, and it's changed its rules with overwhelming support from the party. And indeed, I'm on the ALP National Executive that oversaw those processes as well. What we have is a reform of the party that is very significant, that takes away the ability of any particular power group in the party and gives it to the membership. The membership, 50% of the vote, and the caucus, 50% of the vote, in line with what parties like the British Conservative Party and other parties of both the left and the right have done internationally. In 2013, people want more from their party membership than turning up to a hall once every few months and debating policy. People want that real say. We've given them the say in the most important issue facing a political organisation, that is who its leader will be.
OK, now on the economy, how can you argue and Kevin Rudd argue for voters to trust Labor on the economy when just last week you had another budget blowout? The deficit for this year, remembering of course this year was supposed to be the year we get back to surplus, has blown out by another $12 billion to $30 billion. How can you announce that sort of failure in delivering the budget outcomes you're aiming for and new taxes to pay for it and ask people to trust you on the economy?
Well, as you're aware, Chris, and I would hope that you would support the fact that we have a global market economy. So not everything in a global market economy is in the power of the Australian government to determine. What we know is that our debt is very low. Standard & Poor's confirmed that after Friday's economic statement.
It's heading to $200 billion, net debt of $200 billion.
We're one of only 8 countries, Chris, that have a AAA credit rating from all 3 agencies. Yep. We have relatively low unemployment, we have low interest rates, we have low inflation, we have higher workforce participation, we have economic growth, we have all of the economic fundamentals are still strong. But we do have challenges ahead. We've been upfront about those challenges coming from issues such as the slowdown in China's demand for our resources.
Isn't the political reality the fact that you're asking voters to trust you, that you're promising to get the budget back to surplus in 2016, but of course we've heard promises from Labor for the last 3 years to get back to surplus and you've failed to meet those promises? It's a question of whether people can trust you to deliver a surplus.
Well, Chris, in terms of the decisions that we've made, have a look at what we did on Friday. Now, can you recall, in terms of in the lead up to an election, a government being prepared to be upfront and frank with the Australian people and say these are the circumstances due to the changes in issues like commodity prices.
You couldn't hide it. It was going to come out. We were going to find out about it during the campaign, presumably.
There's been a reduction in revenue. These are the measures we're putting in place to ensure that we deal with these issues. We did that, Chris. And in terms of every time that we come up with a saving, the opposition say that they don't support it. And they start off with a $70 billion black hole, and yet every single announcement that's made, they find a reason to not support it, whilst they go around and impose measures such as the tax that they will impose because of their parental leave scheme for high-income earners.
Indeed. We'll take up some of those issues with Christopher Pyne in just a moment, but just sticking with the
Well, you
government...
you might ask him, there's a good example, given you've got Christopher on. I mean, these are people who've had years to develop an education policy, years to develop one, and yet on Friday, less than 24 hours after Christopher Pyne was saying that our Better Schools plan was a con and included no new money, they came out and said, we have the same policy as Labor. Of course they don't.
I think you've preempted my first...
Because they don't require state governments to put in any money. So they get a freebie. So as federal money goes in, state government money will go out.
OK,
well,
hang
that's
on.
a great plan, that is.
I think you're preempting my first question to Christopher Pyne. Just finally, though, in another issue where Kevin Rudd is trying to present a new face, it harks back to his history, and that is on border protection. Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister who dismantled the Pacific Solution, shut down the Nauru Detention Centre, shut down the Manus Island Detention Centre, and now, faced with an electoral crisis after 45,000 arrivals, over 1,100 deaths, Kevin Rudd says he has a new approach because he's opening the centres that he shut down. Again, how can voters trust him to show the right resolve on this crucial issue?
Chris, as you'd be aware, the people who went to Nauru, who the then government said would not come to Australia, are here. They came to Australia.
Sure,
that was the
problem
problem
want to know about
with
Kevin Rudd and what he's doing now and how people can believe it.
That was the problem with the solution. What we have done is put in place a change policy for changed circumstances.
You've had 6 years. Talk about the Liberals wasting time in opposition. You've had 6 years to develop this policy.
Well, that will ensure that the people smugglers business is broken. And we know that that is happening, in spite of the fact that the coalition have been out there and almost cheering for boats to continue to arrive. We, of course, did have other policy proposals, including around Malaysia, that the opposition refused to vote for. They've been blocking it with their partners in the Greens. Solutions to the Houston panel. We set up an independent panel of 3 experts, none of whom were particularly close to the Labor Party. I mean, Angus Houston, and Paris Aristotle, and of course the former head of Prime Minister and Cabinet under the Howard government. I mean, you know, we set up a process to try and cut through in a bipartisan way. They refused to participate and indeed have done everything they can to block real solutions.
No doubt we'll come back to these issues throughout the campaign. I really appreciate your time tonight, Deputy Prime Minister, and hope to speak to you again during the campaign.
Good to talk to you, Chris.
Well, there he is, Anthony Albanese, a true Labor warrior. We will see a lot of him during the campaign, arguing the case.